story began with a star that fell to earth and landed where you are. You stumbled on my lonely heart. Your love only went so far. Golden days and silver nights, trees are swaying, quiet lights. Didn't think our paths would part. Your love only went so far. On this cold morning I'll be going my way. You chose to stay where you are. Your love only went so far.
Welcome to Deep Focus, a radio show about movies and New Haven. I'm your host, Tom Breen, and I'm joined in the studio today by a guest who's, I think you've been on the show, this is the third time, maybe even the fourth. Yes, so making his third appearance on Deep Focus is Stephen Dest. Fen, thank you so much for coming on to talk about your new movie and also how some of the movies that are already in the can are doing. But it's great to have you here, as always.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
Perfect. So, the primary reason I want to have you on the show today is to talk about the next film in your kind of New Haven trilogy, starting with My Brother Jack, and then I Am Shakespeare. This next one is called Grace. But before we move on to Grace, could you fill me and the listeners in on what's happening with your documentary, I Am Shakespeare, which was the last interview that we had with you on the show? You and the documentary subject, Henry Green, were in the studio talking about the making of the movie, talking about Henry's remarkable story, being both an actor and also involved in street violence in Newhallville, getting shot, recovering, and very unfortunately, Henry recently passed away from complications related to the shooting at the center of I Am Shakespeare. So I wonder if maybe first could you tell us, just since, in the past year and a half since we had you on the show, what's new with I Am Shakespeare, and how are you doing in the wake of Henry's passing?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a lot. I'm doing pretty good right now. It was a difficult summer for not only myself, but obviously Henry's family and everyone involved with the film. Let me back up a little bit. I think is probably best. So, coming in here, I was thinking about that day that Henry and I spent with you. One of my favorite days, talking about the film and spending time with Henry. I think for a lot of people, maybe they don't know, leading up to making the film, Henry and I spent a lot of time together before we actually started shooting his interview, doing talk shows like this, and interviews, and just spending time together in coffee shops and walking around New Haven, and really sort of trying to get a sense of what we want to accomplish with the film. Those are days I thought I would continue to be doing today. I wish he was here right now, obviously, recapping with me what's gone on with the film in the past year, because a lot of great things have happened with the film. We world premiered the film in New York a little over a year ago at the Harlem International Film Festival. And at that time, that's when Henry started to get sick again and have chronic rejection with his transplant. So he was down in D.C. that weekend when I was in New York City, and we had hoped that we'd get together in New York. He could sort of come in and do a Q&A for the film after the screening. It was on a Saturday night. Now, unfortunately, he wasn't released at that time, so he couldn't make it. I bring that up because that was the first time I had talked about the film without him. So, and I thought, okay, well, this was this one time, and I'll carry the torch of the film the best I can without Henry with me. And but that never happened again. I never had that opportunity. So I continued throughout the year doing film festivals, and we did really well. We did a number of festivals. We won a couple of awards, and I stayed in contact with Henry throughout that time, mostly via text messaging. That's just how we communicated for the most part. And he ended up getting a second transplant that didn't go well. Around June, actually, the night we did the International Arts and Ideas / New Haven documentary launch. And we did those screenings, and those who were at the screening know, because I announced that was the night his second transplant actually came in. I tell that story where Henry and I always communicated leading up to an event, and we'd always check in on each other, either to get directions, or I always make the joke about, what are you going to wear? Going to get dressed up, going to go black. What are we doing? And around 5 o'clock that night, that's when that text came in, and I was like, okay, he probably wants directions or that kind of a thing. And he was like, no, I can't make it tonight. They have my transplant, so I have to shoot back down to DC, and I'm sorry. And I'm like, oh, no, don't be sorry. Like, go get it. And that was, that was a little over a year ago. And like I said, I continued to do screenings and events. We put together the website and then the facilitator's guide, which we could talk maybe more about in a little while, which is part of the film. It's part of the educational launch for schools with the film. And then, we just kind of plowed through into the summer, and it was, late July when unfortunately I got the news that a lot of other people got shortly thereafter, that, it was just too much on him physically, and, the body started to break down, and the rejection was just too much. And unfortunately, a beautiful 26-year-old boy, had to say goodbye. Not the night he got shot, but years later, which is a gift. And Henry did a lot of amazing things during that time. And the only thing I can do now is hopefully continue his good work through the film. We just did I don't know if you were there or not, Tom, but we did on Henry's birthday. So Henry's birthday was a couple of weeks ago. And I did a couple free screenings at Neighborhood Music School. I hadn't seen the film. It was hard, and wasn't really able to take a look at it for a while. But I wanted to share the film with the community, and family members came, and it was a really beautiful night. And it was also important to see the film now and to kind of see how it plays now, and honestly, it's stronger than ever. His message is, it's almost like he knew. I don't know. It's so funny how these things change. We made the film thinking like, all right, we'll take this film, and Henry and I will, or Henry alone and me separately as well, we'll take it on this journey to schools and to screenings and wherever we felt it was important to be shown. And watching the film now, since Henry's passed away, the message is stronger than ever. I guess that's all I can really say about it. It works really well. So I continue to thank Henry every day.
Well, obviously you had a very long and personal relationship with Henry, independent of the movie that you made. You were his teacher, became close friends, and then filmmaking collaborators. So certainly my thoughts are with his family and his friends, but also I'm sure this is a very difficult time for you. So thank you for coming on it and for helping to share Henry's story. And when you say that, I want to move over to the facilitator's guide, but when you say that the message of the movie is as strong now in the weeks after Henry's passed away, as you reflect upon the power that this movie can still have for young people learning Henry's story, if you could kind of crystallize that message, what does it mean to you now when you watch I Am Shakespeare, when you think about this story that Henry, in a very, I think, bold and intimate filmmaking kind of stylistic move, the movie is almost entirely close-ups of his face, sometimes in profile, sometimes straight on, talking for an hour and a half about his life. What is that message in a nutshell for you now as you think about it? And and what is it you're looking to share with students who see this movie?
Sort of the amazing thing about Henry is for all of the difficulties and all the struggles that he went through with the violence, with depression, obviously ultimately with getting shot and dealing with gun violence and these things. His optimistic approach to life and his incredible return to full strength, and not just physically, although if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. This was a guy who was, after the post the transplant and getting back, after being told he wouldn't be able to do countless things, was working out twice a day and was eating right and was out there working hard. And all these things, I think at times the message of the danger and the need to communicate on a daily basis and express sort of your challenges and your fears could have, to some degree, maybe were overshadowed by his natural power and beauty and sort of artistic natures. And when you listen to the film now, Henry speaks very, very eloquently about not taking these things for granted. And I think sometimes coming from him, I think you could take it for granted, if that makes sense, because you're like, well, okay, I get all that, but look at you, look how strong you are. Look how, generous you are. Look how open-minded you are, so, all right, so maybe I'll have a bad day or two, but at some point I'll be on the other side of it. And I think when you, and I know you've seen the film, but you should see the film again, and you'll really see this sort of secret message that he puts into every storyline. And then you see it now that you're like, it's like he knew, I'm not out of the woods yet, and there's a lot for me to still do, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it alone. And I think, the one thing, Henry and I, it took a while to get us to that place to make that film, as I think we talked about in previous interviews. We didn't set out to make a documentary. I'm predominantly a narrative fiction filmmaker. I write my fictional characters, and I place them in a world that I feel comfortable with. The New Haven being the place for the last couple of films, and that was the journey. And then this transition happened, and it became a documentary. And everything happens for a reason, and now I see that more so than ever before. So if that makes sense, like this, it needed to be a documentary, and we used to joke about it, like a year ago. Of course, it had, like, who else can be Henry, right? And it's like that wasn't the reason. Now I realize that now.
Tell me about the facilitator's guide before we move over to Grace.
Yeah. So this was so the foundation that funded the film, really have been instrumental in every step with the film, and they had an opportunity after seeing the film to add another level of it, realizing that if you just show a film in a theater or at a film festival, or even if you bring a film into a school or some community organization and you do a brief Q&A afterwards, it tends to become about the film and the filmmaking process, and maybe a little bit about the content. But with this content being as powerful as it is and so multifaceted, it really needed a curriculum, a study guide. And so that's what we have now. It's on the website, and it's 26 pages of in-depth looks at all different aspects of Henry and all the challenges he had. I mean, probably predominantly first and foremost with the gun violence aspect of it, but we deal with PTSD, depression, poverty, and self-esteem issues, and balancing life that we all do, whether you're in school or whether you're at work, but balancing that with your personal life and the sort of multi-personalities that come with that, as we all do.
Do you know of any classes that have used this? Have you gotten any feedback from folks who are?
Yeah, so right, we're just launching now, right? So we just did a canvas of universities all over the country, and and we've gotten back. Yeah, University of Virginia, and so yeah, we've been dealing with that, and as we speak right now with a number of different schools, and meeting with co-op next week. So we'll be bringing that into where, if you don't know, that's where Henry graduated from high school. So that's going to be obviously a powerful, emotional day. So,
and is there any way to see, like, if someone who's listening hasn't seen I Am Shakespeare, what's the best way or the most likely way for them to be able to see the movie?
Yeah. So if you go to I Am Shakespeare has an Instagram, and it has a Facebook page, and it has its website, and it all directs the contact ultimately comes back to me. So you can contact me, and we could do screenings. We'll be going to Hamden Hall with it, with the facilitator's guide. They're actually doing a great thing that I maybe we'll do more of these, where we'll spend a day session with the students doing different parts of the facilitator's guide, and then later on that night doing a full screening for their community, family, and friends. And I think that's so. I really appreciate that they're doing that.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely link to it on the Deep Focus Radio website, and we'll share links to Fenn's website and Facebook page if people are interested in pursuing that. I want to say you're listening to WNHH LP, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm your host, Tom Breen, and I'm talking with New Haven filmmaker Fenn Dest, the director of My Brother Jack, and I Am Shakespeare, and soon to be Grace, the third in his trilogy, all set in New Haven, returning to narrative feature filmmaking after the documentary of I Am Shakespeare. And then, besides reading David Sepulveda's piece about the movie, I think he wrote this past spring in anticipation of a fundraising event at the Arts Council of Greater New Haven that's serving as the fiduciary or fiscal agent for the project. I don't know much about it, so please introduce me and the listeners to Grace.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's important for me to as well to be here talking about it because so as you just mentioned, David did this great piece, and back in May, so I reached out to. Let me back up a little bit. So a lot of people in the community know when I make a film in New Haven, I really try to bring in as many components and businesses and personalities from New Haven, even if it's a fictional film. With I Am Shakespeare, obviously it was Henry, and we could just really lock in on his story. With My Brother Jack, we brought in, we obviously filmed all around the city, but we also did a lot of things behind the scenes with restaurants and designers, and most known is the found object artist, which was sort of the onus of the film in many ways with Silas Finch and his work. And I love that. That was one of my favorite parts of making that film, was doing sessions with Silas, and then ultimately partnering up, getting his work in the film, but also his creative input into making that work. Malcolm Madero, who plays Jack, he's very artistic and musical, and he's a great actor, but he's not a found object artist, right? We always make those jokes, right? Actors aren't really doing those operations. They don't really know how to hold a gun if they're playing a bad, so you need people that know what they're doing to make it look real, right? So that was it was great to have Silas be a part of that. So now with Grace, I was really interested in sort of taking a look at the city from a different perspective. My Brother Jack's gritty and it's artsy, and I think it works in that way. It's always hard to talk about your own work, but that's what people tell me. It's a film noir, and it's got this sort of artistic tone to it that I feel is very New Haven. I Am Shakespeare, Henry Green's story speaks for itself. So I wanted to take a look at that other side of New Haven, that couture side, right? This amazing history and architect and design. And I wanted to start, so obviously I started canvassing around the city and looking at architecture, but I also wanted to bring it a little more personal to my characters. That's just how I work. A lot of times I base it on music. I've had this collaboration with New Haven-based musician Johnny Rogers, who's done work for me. He was my short film Blind that went to Cannes in 2008. At that time, the joke is it went with Cheap Trick material, but then I sold it, and then the first question they asked me was, do you own the rights to these Cheap Trick songs? And I'm like, of course not. So then I reached out to Johnny real quick, and I'm like, I need some music. And at that time, Johnny had shifted into sort of the tone and the sounds that he's been doing with his glass work. And really stuff. But he's as you, some of you may not know, or probably many of you do know, he and his brother Steve were Mighty Purple was this band they were in when they were young, and it was very rock and roll and all this. So luckily he had some material for me, and we just placed it right into Blind, and off it went. And then later he did this amazing score, as many people know, for My Brother Jack.
And now you've kind of built a filmmaking career out of centering local kind of New Haven artists. So glad that Cheap Trick got out of there, and Johnny Rogers get him. But when you're thinking about New Haven architecture, New Haven is a rare example of a very small city that has a tremendously kind of dense and rich architectural history and environment, particularly in the post-World War II years, when a lot of kind of star architects and a lot of money was flooding into the Yale School of Architecture, and we end up with buildings from everyone from Eero Saarinen and Kevin Roach and all those kind of star-level, internationally recognized architects who, even though their buildings are in New Haven, I don't know if they're necessarily associated with the city. Maybe you disagree, but I wonder how do you where are you finding that New Haven angle when you're looking at some buildings made by some of the most renowned architects in modernist architecture history?
Yeah, and that's the great thing about New Haven. I mean, they are in other aspects of the city too. These are world-renowned people, right? In many different disciplines. And in this particular case, we're talking about architect. And you're talking about these guys at the top of that level. But, us in New Haven, it's just Kevin, right? They're just these local guys. We do that with all the writers who live here and certainly the amazing professors and all these different people who sort of walk these streets in New Haven. But at the end of the day, they're just guys you want to have a cup of coffee with. It just happens that in their particular craft and field, they are the best.
Can you give us a one or two liner about the plot of the movie? Is an architect at the center of it? Or
yeah, well, it's more his daughter, right? So it's don't worry out there, any of you architects not facing that. Yeah, it's a fictional character who, like many of us, many hard-working dads and parents, maybe leaned a little too much into our work. I think building iconic buildings around the world and in the city is obviously takes a lot of time and practice and dedication. And during that time, I think he lost sight of his parental duties with his daughter Grace, and she sort of disappeared out of New Haven. And they sort of have to come back together and kind of reconcile that situation. And Grace is this beautiful musician who, like many artists, maybe her passion for art was driven by a void in her childhood. I certainly know I can relate to that, and a lot of artists I know can often speak on that. So I pulled a lot of that through that character, and one of my favorite characters I've ever written. But I really wanted to bring her back home, and that was sort of my catalyst. And when I think of coming home to New Haven, some of the first things I see, are these amazing buildings. And I did focus a little bit right now on some of the earlier drafts on the brutalism and the brutalist buildings, which, like you were talking about earlier, in the 60s, with these really sought after, talked about pieces. Some of them failed. We talked about the New Haven Coliseum. I have a proof of concept clip where I have the demolition day of the New Haven Coliseum, and anyone who lived in this city at that time, certainly knows what that felt like.
Even these, 10 years later, it's still spellbinding to watch that building just
absolutely.
come crashing down. And it's all that, I think it's still a sore spot for a lot of New Haveners, because all we have in that location still is just this blank expanse of asphalt. It's just a parking lot near the Union Station.
I just read an article about that, right? I guess they're still waiting,
It's that
Mayor
Coliseum.
Harp's pushing a little bit now to get something done there, right?
So and these buildings, I'm trying to think of when I think of like brutalist style in New Haven, that I think maybe because of its proximity to like the Union Station, the gateway to the city, think of the New Haven police headquarters, which I don't, from what I know, is not made by one of these star architects we were referencing, but it is brutalism. I think is a style of architecture that is not aged particularly well in terms of how people like
Right.
relate to it,
which is great for film,
emotionally.
by the way. Which is great, and especially for metaphoric purposes.
Because they're
as
very
well.
like alienating things to look at. They're very, using a lot of concrete, and they're pretty squat and angular and
Yeah.
like aggressive looking. Are these like what do you get out of these buildings looking at them from a filmmaker's perspective? Do you see some kind of, I don't know, parallel between the emotional inner state of the characters you're working with and whatever they are surrounded by in the buildings, or are the buildings serving some other role in the movie in what you hope to accomplish?
Well, I think a combination of all those things, but for me, the core of it, especially as from the writing perspective, I saw a lot of correlations between these buildings and their shadows and their edges, which, yeah, I drew upon for Grace's father, and sort of how I saw him, sort of hard and driven, but in the right light, they're extremely beautiful, right? And I think that's the amazing thing about some of these, but even some of the brutalistic parking lot, right? The Temple Street garage, and in the right, when that sun captures it at the right time, or I happen to like it mostly on rainy days. There's something about the wetness on the concrete. You go, oh, that's it. There's the beauty in it, right? But on any normal given day, the other 360 days, it's only like 5 days out of the year that you like really appreciate it, And I know photographers know what I'm talking about. And I was fortunate; a lot of great photographers, sent me some shots and stuff. That really helped in the writing process.
So the Temple Street parking garage, which I think is by Paul Rudolph,
right?
It's so that sounds like one that may be featured in the movie. Can tell me, pick out maybe one or two other buildings around the city that that you respond to in a particularly personal level, or that you want to put in
and
grids.
then and of course the Pirelli building, goes without saying, but there are a lot, the original Knights of Columbus building, in the tubular aspect of it, and some of it's, a lot of this stuff does become personal because I have these stories. I remember back when I was an actor, I was doing this national tour, and one of the actors who was out of the Boston area, he, when he learned that I was from New Haven, he'd be like, "Oh, I lived in Connecticut for a little while. His dad was a doctor at Yale and did a postdoc here or something." And he goes, "Yeah, I lived in the shoreline. I think he lived in Guilford for a little while." And but he used to talk about. He goes, "I was lit. He was like 8 years old, but he would talk about this. He goes, I remember this building that had no walls." And he's like, and that's how we would just spend hours just talking about this building, and I'd be like, well, yeah, that's, I know that building. I drive by it every day, and and we shared that story. And then sometimes it's not even for me; it's memories, and I think, everybody can say that about their communities, but like, we talked about it earlier. The New Haven Coliseum, it's not here anymore, but it's a driving force for me in storytelling. What was once, and for myself as a concert goer, almost daily it seemed at a time, it's a big void, but it's also filled with some really beautiful memories.
Well, I referenced again, I think bold and I'd say very successful kind of stripped down style of I Am Shakespeare, where you're focusing on basically two shots, both close-ups of Henry. From a visual perspective, as you think about how you want to incorporate kind of architecture as the the art form at the center of Grace, how are you thinking about like what you're going to do with your camera, what you're going to do with the characters, and how the story is going to kind of wrap around the buildings visually speaking?
Yeah, so without a doubt, this is going to be my biggest undertaking as a filmmaker, which stands to reason. That's how I want it to be, and especially if you're going to make a movie that's going to feature a character who's an architect, and you're going to feature the city in that way. I always talk about that, right? So My Brother Jack, I stayed on the ground. There's, other than the motorcycle, there's no cars, there's bicycles, and everybody walks, and that's how I see New Haven in many ways. That's how I get around. That's how you get around, right? And that's how many artists get around. And I even did that even when we brought in the criminal aspect storyline, which came later, like my third draft. And it became sort of a whodunit. Even the cops, right? Even the detective, I always had him walking into the scene. sort of coming out of nowhere, which is my memories of spending time in New Orleans. And the police just, oh, there they are. You don't hear the sirens. You don't see the car coming, no chance to escape kind of a thing, right? So I really kept it on the ground level. And then obviously I'm Shakespeare is sort of a different format and a different tone, and it plays that way. Although, we did sneak some aerial footage. So, things change, film styles and as a filmmaker, I mean, you want to grow, but also technology changes. So I didn't have access to a drone when I made My Brother Jack. I don't think I would have used it anyway, but I would have considered it. I suppose it's so great, right? And you can get some amazing shots now. And this city looks great from above. So now I get to do that, right? So now I get to go above the city and look down on it and really open it up in the canvas. But another thing I want to touch on that I was mentioning about Grace is the other balance I'm trying to get of this dark sort of edge with some of these buildings in New Haven is also the yin and yang of that is the beauty. So I was mentioning earlier about reaching out to artists in New Haven that I like to work with. So I had known I was a fan of his work, but I know just like Silas, I didn't know, I wasn't friends with him. I didn't have a personal relationship with him. I just had a professional respect relationship with him. Is a New Haven-based fashion designer, Neville Wisdom. And, I reached out to Neville about the project, and we're really ready for him to say, no, that's not my thing, man. Yeah, but he did. And we've built a friendship, and we built a collaboration. The event we did in May was beautiful up on the rooftop at the Arts Council in the Greater New Haven Foundation building. And, Neville brought sketches, and we projected them on the wall. And I do want to come back to this summer. This summer became difficult because as I was getting ready to start promoting Grace and fundraise, and you had mentioned that earlier. Yes, so the Arts Council has stepped in as the fiscal sponsor for the film, which means if you want to donate to the film, which I hope you do, you could do it as a tax write-off through our nonprofit, Greater New Haven Arts Council. So we really started building this momentum late spring, early summer with Neville, and then Henry passed away, and I felt I didn't feel very inspired to make another film, to be quite honest with you. I felt I needed to take a little break. I'm fortunate that I've been a part of this wonderful summer theater program at a neighborhood music school called Audubon Arts, and that's kind of my distraction for 6 weeks anyway. So the timing, if there could have been good timing for all this, I guess it would have been then. I was able to just focus on directing my musical, and working with those amazing high school kids is always recharges my battery. And everybody was so supportive and understood what I was going through. I guess I don't mean to dwell on it again, but it was a tough time. It was a difficult time. But you got to go back to work, right? And I'm a filmmaker, so I've got to make films. And and Henry was very supportive of Grace, and we talked a lot about it because we walked around a lot. The idea of and I keep coming back to this idea of, is there a way for me to link the three films visually into Grace too, which I'm starting to play around with my new draft. So anyway, so it's exciting to have Neville involved with it and bring in this sort of fashion couture, playing against this hard edge of the city, but really balancing the two to show the beauty. Because, like I said, I've been all over this country. I've traveled extensively, both nationally and internationally. And at the end of the day, when you come back home to New Haven, you're like, damn, this is a good city. This is a good city, but
the town gown divide between between Yale University in particular and downtown New Haven and the surrounding neighborhoods featured quite prominently, especially towards the beginning of I'm Shakespeare. Henry's talking about what helped drive some of the anger and resentment and lack of understanding he felt between himself and a lot of people who wealthier, often whiter, and certainly a lot more privileged, who kind of scoot into the city for a couple months every 4 years and then are out of here.
Right.
It sounds like, unlike My Brother Jack, this Grace is quite deliberately putting a foot into the gown side of town gown a little bit.
Absolutely.
And so, considering how you've explored that theme in previous films, is there something you're looking to say through Grace about how this city struggles with that tension between an elite university at the center of a city where neighborhoods are still rife with a lot of social ills that every post-industrial city has to
Yeah,
deal with.
no, I mean, absolutely. And listen, we're not the only town and gown. I always talk about this, right? We're not the only town and gown city, but we're not just any town and gown city. The gown we speak of is Yale, right? I mean, of course, there's other universities too, but when you say town and gown in New Haven, you know who you're speaking about. And the town, the people that make up this city are extremely passionate and dedicated and intelligent in all their different aspects. In their own right, they're the best at what they do, just like the university is the best at what they do. And yeah, 4 years goes quick. This has always been my experience. You can come into a community, you can sort of play around a little bit with it, and in a blink of an eye, your time is gone. But you leave a mark. And I think in New Haven, we don't forget, and we're affected by those marks, both good and bad. And I think with Grace, I definitely want to sort of draw out not only the bad, but also the good, and the combination of the two. The town and gown thing is always sort of played around with me in my writing, and I've done a lot of treatments that focus on that. I actually once had a project for a reality show based here in New Haven, a very much similar format of town and gown, of putting 3 university students in an apartment with 3 townies and playing that out. And it never came in. We were in development with it. It never happened. But so it's always been around me. And, really, I have to thank Henry again, because in the development of I Am Shakespeare, and then ultimately doing the interviews with Henry reminded me of the impact of the gown in what you had just mentioned earlier. And he did it in a way that gave me a fresh perspective on it as a writer. Because, I'm a university professor at UConn, and so I lived sort of both lives in many ways. And which is good and bad, I think, as a writer. I think it's, with writing, you have to, I've always been taught, at least, and I believe it, you've got to make a choice, and you've got to dig in on it. You can't please everybody. It's okay to piss somebody off. You ultimately will probably gain their respect by doing so. And Henry reminded me of that.
One of their part of our conversation about I Am Shakespeare those months ago that really stuck with me is one of the challenges of making a documentary is that you never really know when the story ends. I mean, you are telling a true story. You're trying to capture as much of it as possible on camera, but these are real people. It's a real world you're documenting, and it just kind of continues. And so part of the requirement of the director is to say, this is where the part of the story that I'm telling ends. You have a lot more control over that when it comes to fiction. As you're saying, you create the characters, right. You create what they go through, you create the setting to a certain extent. Do you feel like you're at a point in Grace where do you have this, is this all in your head right now? It's just a matter of getting the money and the people together to make it happen? Or where are you in the trajectory of putting Grace on camera?
I guess like every business, right? But especially with film, everything's lined up, everything's ready to go, except for that the most important one, right? The financial component. People have come in. We're not at zero, but I don't feel. I can't start it, for me, the way I work. I can't start a project until I actually see the ending and know where I'm going. And with independent films, it's not just about making the film, but having a strategy to get it out there, a marketing campaign. These things are very important right now. There's the running joke with film, right? Everyone's like, the good news is, it's easy to get distribution. The bad news is it's easy to get distribution, right? And I know, Tom, you go to festivals, you go up to Toronto and all that. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. It's back in the, getting distribution was the holy grail for a filmmaker. Now it's, you turn down more distribution offers than you actually accept. It's a whole different game right now. So you have to be prepared for that. And for me, in making My Brother Jack, it was everything lined up well and perfect, and we had a great run with that. It was award winning, and we eventually got it out all the VOD platforms and so forth and so on. But the climate changed like a week later, where that's just not enough. You have to you got to really build an audience beforehand, and that's what the bigger distributors are looking for. So my goal with this film is obviously not only to get the best distribution out there possibly for the film, but also to get the best talent to come in and do the film here in New Haven. I know they want to come here. People may know, I did the sit downs with James Franco and Adrian Brody for My Brother Jack. It's not a matter of not being able to get them. You just have to be prepared to get them, be ready. Not just financially, it's not about, with actors at that level, your budget's not big enough to cover what they can go off and do a watch commercial in Italy and be good for the year, right? So we know that. We understand that, especially guys like that. But with Grace, it is about bringing in some marquee names, some names that are respected in the craft. But also I know have a connection with New Haven or Yale and have a passion for it. So we've lined everything up. I have great producers involved. My crew, many of you guys remember from My Brother Jack, who are based in LA. They're ready to go. Everybody's ready to go. The script is tight, it's sharp. But we just need that completion money, and we'll go make another movie.
I'm so excited to check it out, man. Well, I think this is as good a spot as any then to remind our listeners where they can go and give money. I mean, if people want to check out your previous films, other work you've done, but also if they want to go out and support Grace, where do they go?
Right. So I think we mentioned it earlier, but like I said, I've learned over the years that I guess I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. It's like I always say, especially this time of year, I'm reminded of it because I walk on campus and I show up in my classes and I start to say something about me or about the projects. I teach film and I also teach theater. And my classes are around 40 each. They're capacity classes, and everybody's already done the Google search, and they know, oh yeah, we know that's your film and all that. So I know I'm out there to be contacted. But like we mentioned earlier, I think really quick, I said, like if you haven't seen My Brother Jack, or you just want to be reminded of my work based in fiction, it's on Amazon and iTunes and Hulu and pretty much every VOD platform but Netflix. Those are just usually separate contracts. You do one or the other. So there's always that opportunity. And not just for me. The performances in that film are great. The music's great. The visuals are great. It's just that film ages really well. It just keeps getting better and better with that. And then with I Am Shakespeare, like we said, it's all about that facilitator's guide and getting into your communities, getting into your schools. And I will come to your school. I will spend a day. Listen, I was a New Haven public school teacher at one time in a former life. I know what it's like. I'll sit there and eat that lunch and hang out in the faculty room, do whatever I can to get the film in there, in the message across. I think we mentioned earlier, unfortunately, Henry's no longer with us, but his film and his message is, and that's my job. I always tell people this really quick. Yes, of course, I'm a filmmaker and I need to make films. That's what satisfies me, and I'm determined to make Grace. We set out to make 3 films about New Haven, and we're 2/3 of the way. So we're almost there. So I just need your help to get that funding. And obviously, you can do it and help yourself out by going to the Arts Council. And like I said, they're the fiscal sponsor, and you could donate that way or any other way you want to do it. You could leave money in my mailbox. Any way you want to do it is fine with me. But connecting the 3 films is exciting to me. So thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have a local filmmaker in here. And I talk with a lot of documentary filmmakers. I think that you're quite unique in making feature fiction films set in New Haven, starring New Haven artists and settings, and it's really someone who thinks a lot about movies. It's very exciting to have you working in the city. So we'll make sure to link to all of the great stuff that Fen mentioned on the deepfocusradio.com webpage, where you can find over 3 years of conversations about movies in New Haven. But Fen, we'll catch up with you next time. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom.